Listen to the incredibly brutal and completely terrifying reality of your current existence. You are deeply infected with the absolute most lethal disease known to human potential, and it is violently destroying your massive empire before you even lay the first brick. This catastrophic disease is the arrogant, incredibly foolish assumption that you actually possess an unlimited supply of tomorrows. You sit around comfortably in your pathetic weakness, constantly delaying your absolute necessary execution because you genuinely believe that the universe owes you another day. You look at your massive goals, your heavy responsibilities, and your grand visions, and you casually whisper to yourself that you will definitively start working on them next week. Let me absolutely shatter this toxic, fragile illusion right now. Tomorrow is a massive, pathetic lie. Tomorrow is the ultimate graveyard, where billions of weak men have entirely buried their massive, unfulfilled potential. Every single time you aggressively delay your brutal daily discipline, you are actively committing a massive, unforgivable crime against your own future. Identity, you are treating the incredibly rare, massive gift of time with absolute total disrespect. The Shadow Empire absolutely does not tolerate this pathetic level of arrogance. The apex predators of history, the conquerors who entirely reshaped the absolute fabric of reality, did not sit around waiting for a perfectly aligned massive opportunity in the future. They completely understood that the clock is violently, aggressively, and constantly ticking down to zero. You are currently bleeding time. Every single second that you spend consuming massive amounts of useless digital garbage, every single hour that you spend comfortably sleeping past your incredibly strict alarm, is a piece of your massive life force that is permanently, entirely destroyed. You cannot ever buy it back. You cannot ever negotiate for more. And you absolutely cannot beg the universe for an extension. When your time is finally up, you must execute a massive, violent, psychological override right now and entirely kill the concept of someday. Someday is a comfortable, massive trap designed to keep the weak herd completely sedated while they slowly rot in their average existence. You must wake up in absolute terror to the fact that you are running out of time. The sand is violently pouring through the hourglass, and you are comfortably sitting entirely at the bottom, letting it completely bury you alive. Stop aggressively lying to yourself about the massive, endless future. The only absolute massive territory you actually control is the incredibly brief, violent moment directly in front of you. Wake up. You act as if you have a signed contract with the universe guaranteeing you another massive decade of perfect health and endless opportunity. This contract absolutely does not exist. You are operating entirely on borrowed time that can be instantly, violently revoked without any warning whatsoever. To completely, violently break free from this massive, comfortable illusion, you must forcefully orchestrate the absolute death of someday in your incredibly fragile mind. You must look at your massive calendar, and you must aggressively, mentally burn every single page that comes after today. The weak, incredibly pathetic masses operate entirely on a deferred, massive schedule. They constantly build massive, elaborate, beautiful plans in their heads. They loudly announce their grand intentions to the completely indifferent crowd, and they feel a massive synthetic high just from the act of planning. But when the exact moment arrives to violently strike the heavy anvil and actually execute the painful work, they instantly retreat into the massive, comfortable excuse of doing it later. You must operate on the exact, absolute opposite spectrum. You must become a terrifying, completely unpredictable force of immediate, massive execution. When a massive, incredibly difficult task appears in front of your vision, you do not plan it. You do not aggressively overthink it, and you absolutely do not schedule it for a more convenient, massive time. You violently attack it right now. You draw your heavy iron sword and you aggressively execute the incredibly painful work in the exact moment of its conception. This is the absolute, true, cold architecture of extreme discipline. It is the terrifying ability to forcefully, aggressively close the massive gap between having a thought and taking. Absolute massive physical action. When you successfully entirely eliminate the massive delay between thought and execution, you mutate into an incredibly dangerous, monolithic entity that society cannot possibly track or contain. You move with absolute terrifying velocity while the rest of the week, the world is completely paralyzed by their endless, massive preparations. You must aggressively force yourself into a state of permanent, intense urgency. You must walk aggressively. You must speak clearly, and you must execute your daily, incredibly brutal protocol, as if there is a massive, heavy weapon pointed directly at your head, because in reality there is. Mortality is the massive weapon, and it never, ever misses. You are a highly, incredibly temporary biological machine, and your massive output must be entirely maximized before the gears completely grind to a permanent, absolute halt. Violently rip the massive, heavy anchor of procrastination out of your chest and start aggressively pushing the incredibly colossal boulder right now. The weak crowd desperately relies on perfectly aligned conditions to function. They absolutely need the perfect mood, the perfect inspiration, and the perfect amount of rest before they attempt to take a single massive step. You must completely, violently obliterate this pathetic prerequisite. You execute in the absolute storm. You execute when you are entirely exhausted, and you execute when your fragile mind violently screams for cheap comfort. Immediate brutal action is your only metric. Now that you have successfully, violently killed the pathetic illusion of tomorrow, you must actively, forcefully convert the intense, terrifying fear of your own mortality into a massive, unlimited supply of dark, aggressive fuel. The weak man is absolutely, incredibly terrified of death. He actively avoids thinking about it. He aggressively hides from it, and he builds massive, comfortable, incredibly soft lifestyles entirely designed to distract him from the absolute brutal reality of his own massive expiration date. The Shadow Emperor operates with entirely different mechanics. He looks directly, aggressively into the massive, dark abyss of his own mortality, and he derives a sick, incredibly glorious, immense power from it. Would you constantly, absolutely, remind yourself that your incredibly short, violent life could be entirely extinguished at any given moment? Your completely pathetic excuses instantly, violently evaporate. It absolutely no longer matters if you are incredibly tired. It no longer matters if the incredibly heavy work is incredibly boring. And it absolutely no longer matters if the incredibly weak crowd completely misunderstands your intense, massive isolation. The incredibly loud ticking of the massive internal clock entirely, violently drowns out the pathetic noise of their absolute mediocrity. You begin to execute your incredibly brutal daily tasks with a terrifying cold, incredibly mechanical precision, because you completely understand that every single swing of the massive, heavy hammer might be your absolute, incredibly final one. This intense, massive pressure cooker absolutely forces you to entirely eliminate all the incredibly pathetic distractions from your reality. You aggressively stop wasting your massive energy on trivial, meaningless, incredibly pathetic arguments. You aggressively stop seeking the cheap, incredibly synthetic validation of the weak, massive herd. You become incredibly hyper-focused, completely isolated, and absolutely, violently committed to the massive, heavy, iron task directly in front of you. You are no longer just pushing a massive, incredibly heavy weight up a steep mountain. You are aggressively, violently racing against the setting of the massive black sun. This incredibly intense, absolute pressure entirely, fundamentally, completely alters the chemistry of your mind. It transforms your massive, incredibly deep pain into massive, incredibly sharp focus. You weaponize your incredibly finite, massive existence, and you use it to violently, aggressively crush every single massive, incredibly terrifying obstacle in your path. Grind in the dark. Let the terrifying, absolute work, reality of your impending death, become the massive, heavy iron whip that constantly, aggressively drives you forward. When you completely internalize that, Days are strictly numbered, you will. Absolutely never again waste a single precious hour on the pathetic, trivial drama of average people. Focus entirely on the heavy iron and let the weak masses rot. The incredibly massive, glorious, absolute, ultimate payoff of weaponizing your incredibly terrifying mortality is the massive, undeniable creation of an immortal, monolithic empire. When you successfully, completely, entirely stop waiting for tomorrow and you forcefully, aggressively squeeze every single drop of massive, intense potential out of today, you begin to build a massive, incredibly terrifying structure that exists entirely outside the boundaries of time. The incredibly weak, pathetic people who spent their entire massive lives comfortably waiting for the perfect, incredibly massive moment will reach the end of their incredibly short existence with absolutely incredibly nothing but massive, deep, terrifying regret. They will look back at their incredibly soft, comfortable lives and they will violently, absolutely realize that they entirely, completely wasted their massive, incredibly rare opportunity. But the massive, incredibly terrifying architect of the Shadow Empire will stand entirely alone at the absolute, massive, brutal peak of the mountain. You will look at your massive, heavily scarred hands and you will completely, incredibly, absolutely know that you violently, aggressively left nothing on the incredibly massive table. You completely, entirely outworked the massive, incredibly terrifying clock. You did not aggressively complain about the massive, incredibly short length of the day. You simply, forcefully, aggressively refused to sleep until the incredibly heavy, massive work was entirely, completely done. This is the ultimate revenge against the unfairness of reality. You do not aggressively defeat them incredibly massive, unstoppable force of time by completely trying to live forever. You entirely, violently, aggressively defeat it by building a massive, incredibly undeniable, incredibly heavy monument of execution that completely outlasts your massive, fragile existence. You have entirely, successfully, fundamentally proven that true, absolute, incredibly terrifying power is entirely rooted in extreme, immediate, incredibly violent action. You have evolved from a highly, incredibly reactive, massive, procrastinating puppet into a terrifying, untouchable, incredibly massive force of absolute, extreme execution. You must strictly carry this dark, cold, incredibly monolithic, aggressive urgency with you for the rest of your incredibly short, massive existence. Whenever you violently feel the incredibly pathetic urge to delay your massive work, to completely rest, or to incredibly comfortably, incredibly wait for a better massive day, you must immediately, aggressively, violently recognize it as the massive disease trying to kill your empire. Suppress it instantly, violently. Execute the massive, incredible work and build your monolith in the incredibly dark, silent void. Execute right now. There is absolutely no second chance. You either violently build the massive empire today, or you inevitably die a completely forgotten, pathetic slave to the system. Until I win.